So this is 3.1 through 3.3. It's actually 3.1 through 3.2. We're going to do some questions together before you guys do the quiz review. That way we can be a little bit more familiar with all of this material. So looking at number 1 and 2, where our graph crosses the x-axis, those are the solutions for our function that it gives us here. So where does our graph cross the x-axis? Where does it touch the x-axis? What number? 5. Perfect. It touches at one spot here, which is 5. So x is equal to 5 is our answer. That's it.
Wait, what's our quiz?
All right, number 2. What would our solutions to number 2 be? Awesome. 2 and 4. So our graph crosses at 2 and crosses at 4. So those are the two solutions. We could solve this by factoring if we wanted to, but we could just use our graph, and where our graph crosses the x-axis, those are the solutions to our equation here. All right, so then for number 3, what are our solutions for number 3? -4 and 2. Perfect. All right, number 4 says solve using square roots or by factoring. So if we have just an x squared, we want to solve by taking the square root. Or we could have like parentheses with like x plus a number squared that we want to take the square root also. But if I have an x squared and an x and some number, it has to be equal to 0, and then I want to solve it by factoring. So whenever you have an x squared and an x, you have to solve by factoring. You can't solve by just taking the square root, because x squared and x are not like terms, so there's no other way to do it besides factoring.
X plus x plus number?
It'll be like x squared plus x plus some number.
Oh, okay.
So just like a general example. So it has to have an x squared term and an x if we're going to factor. So for number 4, would I solve using square roots or factoring? Square roots, because I don't have an x term. I just have an x squared. So 2x squared minus 15 is equal to 0. When we solve by taking the square root, I need to get the squared term all by itself. So I want to move everything else to the other side. So what could I move to the other side? I can add 15. So 2x squared is equal to 15. What would I do next? Divide by 2. So x squared is equal to 15 over 2. Awesome. To get rid of that squared, I have to take the square root of both sides. So what does x equal? Plus or minus square root 15 over 2. Awesome. Whenever we take the square root of both sides, you need that plus or minus. So do not forget the plus or minus in your answer. It means that like the positive and the negative answer would both work here. So positive square root 15 over 2 and negative square root 15 over 2. So here, would we solve by using square roots or factoring? Factoring, because I have an x squared and an x. So I would have to factor it. How can I factor this? How do I factor when I start with a number that's not 1? Multiply the first and the last. So 3 times -2 would be -6. What are two factors of -6 that add to -1? 3 and -2 would be +1. -3 and +2. So x minus 3 and x plus 2. So if I started by multiplying, what do I have to remember to do? divide. So I would divide both of these numbers by 3. Simplify if we can. So I have x minus 1. And if we can't simplify, we bring it in front of the x. So 3x plus 2. Now I factored it, but did I solve it yet? How do I solve? Make both equations equal to 0. So x minus 1 is equal to 0. And 3x plus 2 is equal to 0. And then I just solve both my little equations here. So for the first one, I would add 1 to both sides. So x is equal to 1. Second one, subtract 2 on both sides. 3x is equal to negative 2. And then divide by 3. So x is equal to negative 2 over 3. So these are our two answers here. Square root. We factor when it's x squared plus x. Here, it's just x plus 3 squared, so we don't factor. This is the only time we would factor it, plus a number. So solve using square roots here. What do I need to do first? How do I get that x all by itself? How do I get rid of the squared? Square root both sides. So I square root both sides. It'll cancel out on the left. So x plus 3 is equal to what? What do I have to remember to do when I take the square root of both sides? Plus or minus square root 8. And then what's the next thing I should do? Subtract 3. Can I combine negative 3 and square root 8? No. So it's x equals negative 3 plus or minus square root 8. But can I simplify square root 8? What are two factors of 8? 2 and 4. And two factors of 4? 2 and 2. So I would circle what? 2 2's. So what comes to the outside? A 2. And what stays on the inside? 2. So this would be negative 3 plus or minus 2 square root 2. So 7 says find the value of x and y that satisfies the equation. What do I need to do here? So I set the real ones equal to each other. So 7x is equal to 14. And then how could I solve for x? Divide by 7. So what does x equal? Awesome. X equals 2. And then to find y, what do I need to do? Set the imaginary ones equal to each other. So negative 6i is equal to yi. And then how do I solve for y? Divide by I. So what does y equal? Negative 6. So we just set the real parts equal to each other, then the imaginary parts equal to each other. So we have two little equations here. All right, let's look at 8. So it says perform the operation. I have to add here. So we do not FOIL. We only FOIL when we multiply. How would I add these together? Add the real parts together, then add the imaginary. So what is 2 plus negative 4? Negative 2. And then the imaginary parts, I have 5i plus 3i. 8i. Can I add negative 2 plus 8i? No, they are not like terms, so we just leave it separate. Which part has to come first when it's in standard form? The real part has to come first. So make sure that real number's first, then the imaginary one. For number 9, what do I have to do first here? Distribute the negative. So 3 plus 9i, the negative gets distributed to both things behind it in the parentheses. So it would be negative 1. And what's negative times negative 7i? Positive 7i. And then what should I do next?
Or the the reals first. 3 minus 1.
It's best to add the reals first since that goes first in your answer. So 3 minus 1 is 2. And then 9i plus 7i, 16i. So don't forget, the real number has to come first. Any questions here? All right, for number 10, what should I do here? FOIL. So I am multiplying, so that means I have to FOIL. So start by multiplying the first ones. 2 times negative 3 would be negative 6. The outsides, what's 2 times negative 5i? Negative 10i. The insides, what's 4i times negative 3? Negative 12i. And then the last ones, what's 4i times negative 5i? Negative 20i squared. Awesome. I times I becomes I squared. And then what do we know that we have to do with I squared? Change it to negative 1. So what's negative 20 times negative 1? Positive 20. So anytime we see an I squared, you just change the sign of the number that is in front of it. And then the last thing we need to do here is combine our like terms. So it's negative 6 plus 20. 14. What is negative 10i plus minus 12i? Negative 22i. Can I combine these together? Nope, they're not like terms, so just make sure the real number goes first. All right, 11. Find the zeros of the function. So to find the zeros, it's the same thing as solve. We would just change the f of x part to be 0. We're just solving this. So 9x squared plus 2. Should I solve by doing the square roots or factoring? Square roots. So I got to get that x squared all by itself. So what should I do first? Subtract 2 on both sides. So 0 minus 2 would be negative 2 is equal to 9x squared. Divide both sides by 9. So x squared is equal to negative 2 over 9. Awesome. To get rid of that squared, I square root both sides. What do I have to remember to do when I square root both sides? Plus or minus. So I have x is equal to plus or minus square root negative 2 over 9. Awesome. I can take out the negative and make it an I. So this is square root 2 over square root 9. Can I simplify one or both of these? So I can't simplify square root 2. I would just leave that. Square root 9 is 3. Perfect. So this would be plus or minus I square root 2 over 3. Is this a real solution or an imaginary solution? Imaginary, because I have an I in it. So looking at the next question, does the graph of the function intersect the x-axis? Why not? Because it's imaginary. Because it's an imaginary number, it does not intersect the x-axis. So if I had a graph, if I graphed this, it looks something like this probably. Where it's just, it's not crossing the x-axis, yeah. And it'll never cross the x-axis. That's why our solutions here are imaginary.